All right. Hello, everybody. This is Jason Mudd with Axia Public Relations. I've got some members here of our news media team. Starting in the top left, or my top left at least, you've got Marjorie Comer. Marjorie, welcome. We're glad you're here. Marjorie has been part of the Axia team for about 11 years now, and she's an award-winning public relations professional, and she helps oversee their news campaigns. And then we also have with us to my bottom left, Casey Clee. Casey is a trusted advisor coordinating day-to-day activities for various client programs. Clients love Casey's enthusiasm and attention to details. She joined Axia in August of 2021. And then in the other bottom right corner, we have Bob. Bob, welcome. Glad you're here too. Bob is an account director, a PR strategist, and award-winning television news anchor and reporter. His client experience includes Boeing, Johnson & Johnson, Nationwide Insurance, Sony, T-Mobile. And Bob joined our agency in February 2023. I'm Jason Mudd, a trusted advisor and strategist for some of America's most admired brands. I founded Axia in July 2002. I was recently named top PR leader in North America, and I'm glad to be here. And today we are sharing our best practices for earning media coverage and media relations. This is obviously an important topic. When people think about public relations, they are almost always by default thinking about media coverage and earned media. And earned media comes from media relations and being obviously putting on a hat, thinking about what newsroom wants and how you can help newsrooms and journalists get stories told. Meanwhile, if you think about it, it's like a Venn diagram. There's what the newsroom wants to know, there's what our clients want to tell, and there's what the audience of those news outlets want to learn. And so it all has to work really well together. We all have to be very focused on what's of interest to the marketplace and use newsrooms and journalists as an audience, a channel, and a tool of public relations, and more specifically for today's conversation, earning media coverage and news coverage. So we've got a list here of different things we want to talk about, but we're just going to have kind of a spontaneous conversation as well to kind of keep it light on this Friday afternoon. We're recording on April 21st. Of 2023. So let's talk about planning and preparation. So just so our audience is aware, we want to talk about 5 different categories today of media relations and best practices of earning media coverage. The first one is planning and preparation. The second one is relationship building. Third, we'll talk about messaging. Fourth, actual pitching. And then last is follow-up. So Bob, you want to share one of your favorite tips or some of your advice when it comes to planning and preparation for media relations work?
Yeah, will do, Jason. Thank you. The goal for any public relations person is the media list, the contact list, and the relationships that we build with the media. And one of the things that was introduced to me very early on in my PR career is the idea that you cannot just fully accept the first pass of a media contact list. You have to scrub it a little bit and make sure that your contacts are as close to the ground floor of people who put stories into magazines, onto TV shows, on the radio, whatever the case may be, as possible. So for instance, if I get a media list full of, and I'm looking at national TV shows, and I get the executive producer of the Today Show, for example, I am not going to have much luck trying to knock on the door of the executive director of that big program. But if I can get down to maybe an associate producer, or even better, a booker of a segment on one of those shows, those are the people I want to make relationships with. That's where I want to put my time in. So my first thought on planning is to scrub your initial find of your media list and do some research and find the people that are as close to storytelling as possible.
Bob, I'm going to yes and that. I believe you're absolutely right. And I would say yes, and it's really helpful when you can get to the actual reporter that's going to do the story themselves. And as we all know, but maybe our audience doesn't, is those reporters are challenged or required or requested to bring a news story or a story idea to every meeting, every newsroom meeting they have, a pitch meeting. They have one about every day. And some days it's hard to come up with one, and some days they have two or three. And maybe ours is going to be a better one or a backup one or one they can give to a friend. But at the end of the day, they need a pitch. They need a story to pitch their own producer for. And if they don't have one, they're not in a good spot. Bob, I bet you could talk a little bit about that based on your television experience.
Oh my gosh, I'm having flashbacks now you say that, Jason, because part of my professional background is I was a local TV news reporter and anchor. And one of my first jobs was at KPLC TV in Lake Charles, Louisiana. And the news director required that we come into every morning news meeting with 3 story ideas. And if you can imagine, Lake Charles has a fair amount of stories, but there are definitely slow news days. And so it was a gift if anybody came to me the night before or that morning and said, hey, I've got a story idea for you. Because there was plenty of mornings I was stressed out driving into work and saying, I got nothing. Mm-hmm. And that informs how I form my pitches and how I build my relationships with my media members too, that we'll talk a little bit later about. We're giving them a service. We're not there to pester. We're actually helping them in a lot of ways.
I saw a report that said about 50% of news stories came from a PR person.
Oh, wow. Wouldn't be surprised, yeah.
Sometimes journalists say, I don't need PR people. I've got all the stories I need. And that might be true for them. But for everyone saying that, I bet you there's 2 or 3 other ones who are like, oh my gosh, I depend on PR people for my guests, for my experts, for my story ideas, et cetera. So, we should never beat ourselves up and feel like we're not part of that process, because we absolutely are. And we're the eyes and ears. And I think we'll get into this a little bit later, but, the idea of bringing somebody a news story of value that you may have nothing to do with, but you heard it on the street and you want to be a helpful source for those journalists to build that relationship. Bob, when you went to these assignment meetings, they typically start between, in my experience, 9, 9:30 or 10. What is that similar to what your experience has been as well? I mean,
yeah.
Obviously for the day shift, right?
Yes, I was a day shift reporter in that station, and we had newscasts at 5. We may have had a 6 and a 10. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So and you probably had a noon. We had a noon. Mm-hmm. So yes, your day would start around 9 a.m. You'd do about a 30 to 45 minute news meeting where the assignment desk would lead it generally. Mm-hmm. So the assignment desk would come and the general releases of the day is what they would bring forward in the meeting. And then one by one, the news director would go around the room to each reporter and say, what do you got? Yep. And you had to pitch. Yeah. And, it was a good day if you had something set up and it was your idea and it was newsworthy. That was a great day.
Yep. Do you get a chance to say pass in those meetings, Bob, or you?
I wish I could get if I had a get out of jail free card, yeah. I would have used 100 of them. Okay. Jason, it got this is an indication of how slow it can get in those type of markets. I did a 5th grade field trip one time for our newscast, one of our evening newscasts. It was like a 2-minute story about 5th graders going through one of the historical districts of Lake Charles, looking at houses. Okay. I mean, we get desperate. So, yeah.
Did you say 2 minutes?
It was about a 2-minute. Every newscast for local TV news, you're filling about 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes. Yep. Whether there's news going on or not, you've got to fill that.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I wanted you to clarify 2 minutes, because I think, the best thing we can do and our audience can do is consume news, right? Watch local TV, watch national TV, read local newspapers, national newspapers, to get a sense of what's news, what's newsworthy, what's trending, what topics are out there. But I think sometimes clients have this misunderstanding, or if you're listening to this in your client side, your managers, your leaders, your bosses, your internal client, they think if they're going on television, it's going to be for a longer period of time than 2 minutes, 4 minutes kind of thing. But, in television, if you're on for 4 minutes, you're on for a long time. And
it's a long time.
Yeah. You might not feel like it's a long time when you're in studio or when you're doing the interview and they edit it down to 4 minutes. But for the viewer, what they don't want is them to get bored and click the channel and move on to the next thing or fast forward on their device. So, it is going to be short. And I'm glad you mentioned 2 minutes, because sometimes people have this idea it's going to be a 10-minute, mini documentary, and it's just not going to be that.
No, it may take 10 minutes to do the interview. The final edit will probably be about 20 seconds.
Yeah,
that 10-minute interview. Yeah.
that's right. That's
Which
right.
is why it's so important, when we're helping clients, that they have key messages and sound bites prepared, like that they know what they're talking about, just so that, you want to make sure that it may have been a 10-minute conversation, but you want to make sure that those key messages are hit upon. Yeah, I'm currently in a smaller market myself, and some of the news stories are quite fun to try and pitch and to communicate with the news media here.
Yeah.
So.
You're always looking on a local media, you're always looking to localize a national story. And PR people do that with newsjacking. What we're trying to do is tie in a newsworthy item involving our clients to a national story. So it's kind of the same idea.
Well, there's a cliche in news, right? All news is local. And so if you can find a local angle to a national story, then that's very beneficial. And while we work and focus on national clients, it doesn't mean that our clients don't have local stores, local locations, local factories, facilities, offices, et cetera, and local experts. And so, if a topic is trending in the national news and we have a client who's based in, Atlanta or Chicago or Austin or Dallas or something like that, we can, as you said, kind of newsjack or tie on to that trend of that story nationally and offer the media in that marketplace, an expert as well. So, all right. So any more thoughts or ideas on proper planning and preparation?
I mean, I would say honestly, in my experience, obviously scrubbing the media list is so important, but also every time you have a pitch, I think that's an opportunity to almost create a new media list. Whether you're taking people off of your list or you're adding new contacts that you haven't necessarily pitched a lot to before, using media databases to search, like, this is the topic of my pitch and who's writing about this, has been a really great tool for me to kind of like narrow the funnel of who exactly I'm going to start pitching to.
I love that, Casey. That's a very good point. So what we're describing is, Bob said first, you take a big media, a list of all the media, and you kind of start funneling it and narrowing it down to where you have a tighter target. And what I think I'm hearing Casey say is then you might take that same media list and maybe even go up a little bit broader and then narrow it down and customize it even more specific to the one-time pitch or the one-time story or topic that you have. So there's really just an ongoing process of grooming and narrowing down the focus of that list, so that you're more aiming at a very specific target instead of a very broad target.
Right. Quality over quantity, I think, honestly.
I would agree with that. And I think also, especially with TV news outlets and national news with TV, is the shorter the better. The more you can get to the punch right off the bat, the better. So, part of the planning is look at your pitch and then ask yourself, can I say this in 1 or 2 lines? It's an elevator pitch on steroids. That's what you kind of need to do.
Yeah, I like that. I like the idea that you can summarize the pitch in 1 or 2 sentences. And if they bite, that's when you can give them more information, but you're really just kind of teasing them to get them interested, and maybe even interested enough to show up to that pitch meeting, right? Where they can, pitch the thing and then come back to you to get all the details. Because they really don't need all those details just to do the initial pitch.
Right.
Agreed.
Yep. We were talking earlier about media lists, and I think what we're going to start seeing, and I'm already seeing and already starting to use some of these tools personally, but there's AI engines that some of our media database providers have now, where you can go in and tell them the topic, and it'll come back to you with a list of, well, here's some of the people you might want to pitch for this, and so that's going to be, I think, an interesting game changer. But just like everything AI, it's still learning. It still needs to be, supervised and implemented properly. I was telling somebody the other day that, AI, if you ask it to write something, it typically is writing it at what I would describe as an entry level quality. So the same quality maybe that an intern or an entry level person could do. The problem is for people who are not, experienced professionals, what do they do after they have that? Where professionals like us would use that as a foundation and then build upon it, make it better and better and better. And then, that did a lot of the heavy work or the busy work for you. It created a foundation for you of which you could then optimize. But if you're maybe somebody in-house who's not very experienced, unfortunately, AI may have brought it to the level that you're comfortable doing, but then you don't know how to polish it and perfect it beyond that. So, AI will just, as a, tangential, AI is never going to replace the PR person because it's still about relationships, and you still have to be human to have those types of relationships. But AI is a tool that we all should be using and leveraging to make ultimately our time more efficient and get a head start on the first draft, or whatever it might be, and borrow from the recommendations of an AI engine of who might be a good person to pitch this to and that kind of thing, and use that to help identify broader leads for your media list as you narrow it in.
And Jason, I think to experiment with that is wise on our part too, to get your feet wet with ChatGPT and play with it a little bit. A colleague of mine was just telling me the other day that these tools will also, if you direct it, you can say, communicate in the voice of a 40-year-old woman who makes $150,000 a year. I mean, it can be that kind of directive that you can give to these tools to give you some copy that may speak more directly to a booker at a national TV show than anything I could come up with myself.
Yeah, that's
but you're absolutely right. It still needs the human touch. It always needs the human touch.
Let's talk for a minute. Does anybody else have anything else about planning and preparation they want to share?
Not right now, but I won't say that I won't come back to it later.
Well, if you think of something, don't forget, just write it down. We'll do a little recap later where we can do an open forum for more ideas. Let's talk about relationship building. Marjorie, you want to go first with a relationship building tip?
Yeah, relationship building is probably one of my favorite things that I get to do as a PR professional. I can recall one reporter that I connected with. I had found a bio from a previous article that she'd written, and her bio stated that she loved to garden and just loved spending time in her garden. So as I started to build a relationship with her, I asking her some questions, and then I asked how her garden was, and it just took off from there. I told her about my garden and the vegetables and things that I had here at my house, and she was just like, oh, well, I'm more into the floral garden. But I mean, we built this relationship on gardening, and she ended up sending me photos of her house and her garden, and
Wow.
I mean, it was a beautiful way to build a relationship. And then she did end up writing about what I had pitched her about, but it was just, I mean, I spent then several weeks after that just still connecting with her about her garden, sharing with her. I think we'd gotten some vine bugs or whatever that, I don't know, they ate my cucumbers, but it was just such a cool thing. I mean, how many other reporters or how many other PR professionals are getting pictures of their reporter that they've just met, their house and their garden? I mean, and her garden was, amazing. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it's just about what would you talk to your friends about? It doesn't, building a relationship with a reporter doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to be this taboo thing. I mean, it's just, we're all people and we all want to build a connection with someone else. Mm-hmm. So just don't be spammy and make a friend.
Be real, be authentic, be willing to build that relationship. Casey, did you have something?
Yeah, I think honestly, I love the overarching theme of that, because I feel like we kind of lose the human aspect and sound a little bit salesy sometimes as we're pitching. Mm-hmm. But I joined a new market recently. I moved to a new city. And I think just sending out those emails, introducing myself to local journalists, did wonders, because the relationship between a PR person and a journalist could be such a dynamic duo if it's done correctly, mutually beneficial. Everybody gets something from the relationship, and it doesn't have to be this pressure of I'm only in your inbox because I want you to cover what I'm pitching you.
Mhm. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
good.
I think there's no replacing good old fashioned manners. Asking somebody in advance, introducing yourself and asking them if they'd be open to connect, asking if you can pitch a story to them, just starting there rather than just out off the gate saying, I'm going to pitch you something. I think
Mhm.
that's a good place to start. Handwritten notes, thanking a journalist for a mention or an article coverage just for their interest. Thank you so much for that. I think that goes a long way. I think the gut factors into this too. If you start to feel like you're creeping somebody out, you probably are. And I think that's probably a good indication you to maybe take a pause and back it off, even though it hurts to do it sometimes as PR people, because we're so like, I've got to get this mention, or I've got such a good story, just to back off a little bit, just like a relationship. Sometimes the best thing to do is say, I need a timeout here.
Yeah.
I'm going to share
Right.
something. When there's a great cliche we've all heard, right? It's not what you know, it's who you know. But I actually think that's wrong. I think the truth is it's really who knows you, because you could know somebody, but if they don't know you, then it doesn't matter. So I know of Richard Branson, but it doesn't mean he's going to take my phone call. But if Richard
Yeah.
Branson called me, I'm probably going to answer the call, right? I'm going to take that call. So I think it's important that we think about that. It's not just who we know, but it's really who knows us. And so to that end, one example would be that one day I just realized, I ought to connect with a lot of the journalists that are part of my daily routine of the news that I consume, even though I may never pitch them. At least I'd like to get connected with them on LinkedIn, follow them on Twitter, et cetera, which I may already do, but they're not in my network. And so one day, as I was listening on audibly to CNBC news alerts, Wall Street Journal news alerts, the things you get on your Alexa device, right? I was just mindfully listening to the names I hear every single day, but I didn't really think to take the time to connect with them on LinkedIn. And so I just connect with them on LinkedIn. I just said, hey, I listen faithfully every day. Like your voice is playing while I'm getting ready in the morning, when I'm driving in the morning, or whatever it might be, when I'm doing my morning workout. I really just kind of found when I generally hear them reporting, and I made it personal. I say, I hear you every morning when I'm going for a walk, or whatever it might be. And then I said, I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn. And so then that's an authentic relationship you built with them. You're telling them their work matters and that you care and that you want to follow them closer to see what they're up to. And then with the right time, you might be able to pitch them, the example I mentioned even just this morning to Casey and Bob was that I was recently interviewed by Inc. magazine for a story. I was not included in the story, but I went ahead and shared the story on my social media. I tagged the reporter and I tagged the outlet so that hopefully she thinks of me again as this person took the time to share the story, even though they weren't part of it. That shows I'm a good sport and that I'm a good connection. And I'm not bitter or upset, even though I was disappointed, that my soundbite didn't get included. I'm still playing nicely and playing along and, supporting her work of journalism. And I think that's the one thing you could do is really reach out to people on Twitter or other social media platforms, even just send them an email and just say, I really liked your reporting on this story today. And that's it. And then wait for them to reply and say, hey, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Then you could say, hey, do you mind if we connect on LinkedIn? Or P.S. I follow you on Twitter and here's my handle if you want to follow me back. Then you built that foundation, and then maybe months from now, weeks from now, or maybe even years from now, you'll go back to that email that you were kind and they were kind back and you weren't asking for anything. And then you might say, hey, I've got this story. I don't know if it'd be a fit for you, whether that's for your client or somebody else.
Yeah. And Jason, I would think even to caveat that a little bit is mean it.
Yeah.
So sometimes we're guilty in PR, or some of our colleagues are guilty in PR of saying, hey, I read this article, good job. And you didn't really read it. You didn't really care about it. You just kind of sent it because you want the journalist to know, hey, I noticed what you were doing. So I think if you're going to take the time to mention stuff like that, really invest yourself in understanding the piece that you're commenting on. So Jason, I think you're absolutely right. If you're a real listener, a real consumer of that media, let the person know. you know, that's great.
Yeah, I think what you're saying too is have some substance when you're commenting or complimenting, right?
Yeah,
Not just a great
authenticity.
article. Yeah, you could say,
Authenticity.
you know, I really like this article, especially how you went here or here.
Yeah.
And then that might be a time to say, you know, if you've thought about it, maybe you might want to do, you know, go this direction as a follow-up story. Obviously not
Mhm.
to benefit you or your client in any way, I would say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
And we had this experience. Yeah, go for it,
I
Marjorie.
was just gonna say, I've done that before, and I've actually like, oh, I don't really like maybe the angle that they were taking in this, or didn't really fully understand what they were trying to say in this article. So I've like skipped down like 3 or 4. So not even like I haven't picked the most recent article, you know, because I've read several of them and said, oh, okay, this one really spoke to me, and here's why.
Mm.
And then kind of along the same lines, you know, just building those relationships. And as you follow them on LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter or whatever, you may find out when special events are in their lives, such as birthdays or anniversaries.
Mm.
You know, there's one reporter that I've built a pretty nice relationship with, and found out that we have the same birth date, not the same year, but just the same birth date. So it's really easy to just text that reporter each year on her birthday and say, happy birthday, twin, or, you know, like it may be a little cheesy, but I mean, it also shows that I'm remembering and recognizing them on this day that is special, because if they didn't have a birthday, then
Any common ground you can find, right? That's
yeah.
human and genuine. Casey, you do a really good job of building relationships, in my opinion, with media. And one of the things that I've learned from you is the idea that even when you're not pitching, it's helpful to give. Sometimes it's helpful to give a freebie, if you will, to your media members. So you aren't pitching them, hey, cover my client. It's like, hey, I came across this. I think it may actually fit you. And I was thinking about you. Here you go. Would you
Yeah,
agree with that?
sometimes I think honestly, they start to think of you as more of a resource if you're constantly just like feeding them tidbits.
Yeah.
And honestly, even if it has nothing to do with your client, it's a good way to kind of get your foot in the door and say, hey, I know I sent this to you last week. I have someone who can talk about that, or I have a thought leader here who can offer their perspective.
Mhm.
And it's kind of not really a sly way to like sneak your client in there, but just continuously feeding them information, I think makes it feel less salesy.
Yeah, and I think part of our job is to stay on top of the news, and some of the news doesn't always fit our clients, but it may be a great story idea for somebody on our media list for that client.
Exactly.
So give them a freebie.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting too, particularly being in the agency world. Sometimes you get a new client. Obviously, we all have our little niche industries, but sometimes you get a client and you feel like you're learning a whole new industry. And so just consuming the news yourself, and whether or not it relates to your client, like finding out what's trendy in their industry can be really helpful in terms of understanding what your contacts are even looking for.
Yeah. And it goes to one of the adages that was given to me a few years back from a random guy in my life. I've met him in an airport. I won't give you the whole backstory, but it's just a random person that gave me this great nugget that I lean on. And it's the idea that small visits lead to long relationships. And it's absolutely true. Your dialogue or your conversation with journalists don't have to be this big pitch. It can be just a, hey, thinking about you, or happy birthday, like you said, Marjorie, or I would, found this cucumber seed or whatever. And that's all it has to be. And that could lead to something 2 months from now where that journalist says, hey, I was thinking about that pitch you gave me a year ago,
Yeah, sometimes we get nervous with the idea of thinking of short visits, pitching media. And, I know early in my career, I'd pitch a reporter or a journalist. I'd be a little nervous, and so it'd be like one of those things. It's almost like it'd make me think back to like, the movies, like back in the 80s or whatever, when I was growing up, where the guy would call the girl and ask her out on a date. And as soon as she said yes, he'd be like, okay, great. And like hang up, because you're so nervous and you don't want to say anything to blow it. And I remember that's how my early days of pitching media were. I'd get them to say yes, they want to do something. I'd be like, okay, fantastic, we'll call you at 3. Okay, bye. And it was just like get off the phone quickly, you know, because one, you're nervous, and two, you got them to say yes. You don't want to do anything to talk them out of it. And
Yeah.
so, you know, but it doesn't have to be like that, because, you know, I was talking to a journalist last week, and he was saying, you know, my least favorite thing about journalism and reporting is calling people who aren't expecting me, calling people who don't want to hear from me. And I was like, as a PR person, totally can relate to that, right? And you know, especially when you call a reporter and they're brushing you off, like, what do you want? I'm busy, I'm on deadline. And it's like, oh, I'm already anxious enough about calling you. Now you've made it even worse. But the right people with the right relationships, if they know you, if they like you, know you, and trust you, you know, then that makes it even easier. And, you know, I literally had a reporter once tell me in a newsroom, you know, this is going to date me, because, you know, we used to send stuff over the fax machine, but she said, in our newsroom, every time something comes across and it says Jason Mudd or it says Axia Public Relations, everyone I know in our newsroom will look at it twice, because it has your name on it and you've got a good reputation here. And so that speaks a lot to, you know, just having that relationship from the beginning. And every time we talk about reputation and relationship, I'm thinking of our core values, right? Integrity, ideas, relationships, results, and improve. And you need all 5 of those things to be really good at PR. You need all 5 of those things to be really good at media relations. And I said this to, I know at least Bob already today, but, you know, it blows me away how much sales is like dating and media relations is like salesmanship, right? You're pitching, right? You're pitching someone to go on a date with you. You're pitching someone to go on a second date with you. You're building a relationship, and you have to be really good at relationship building. Same thing with selling. You've got to build trust quick and early and continue to add value in those conversations. Same thing with pitching media. You've got to add value to those. So let's transition. And if you have other ideas, take a note. We'll come back to them later. But what about messaging? What do we need to be thinking about when it comes to earned media coverage and media relations? What are some tips, tricks, techniques, or recommendations that you have for messaging those pitches and messaging when you're, you know, putting something in front of a reporter?
Yeah, I think personally, first and foremost, keep it concise. Your important story that you're trying to pitch can so easily get lost in a paragraph or two. And so if you can get that main idea that you're trying to get across down to maybe like 3 lines, maybe a couple bullet points that you can come back with a follow-up, I think that's great. And obviously your contact immediately sees what you're trying to say. So
yeah. I think using white space, drawing the eye to your key, you know, takeaways is really smart. I love to use bold print on the exact ask or the most important line in what I'm constructing as an email, and withholding some of your best stuff. You know, give them the headline, but don't give them all. Think about a 3-step process with your pitch. Your messaging is the initial contact, the follow-up, maybe another follow-up, maybe even another follow-up, and always thinking, what's the fresh information I can give them on each of those follow-ups?
Right. I kind of think of it like you're playing poker and you don't play all your cards at one time.
Yeah.
So you can't put all of your juicy info in the initial attention-grabbing message. You have to save something for your follow-ups. Otherwise, you're kind of just restating your initial pitch.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to think of it like fishing, and like, you know, you've got the worm, and like, you know, you entice the fish and they may not always get that first bite, but then you cast it again, and you know, you try again, and you follow up. In addition to, like, with the messaging is just your subject lines. They do matter. And they may change. You know, this may fall a little bit more under pitching and individualizing those pitches, but your subject line is going to vary depending on who you might be pitching. You know, if you're pitching in a news TV news station, your subject line may be like great live shot, like, you know, or live shot opportunity. then because that's going to catch their eye versus, if it was for a newspaper or magazine, it just, you need to tailor your subject line and your messaging depending on your outlet.
And Marjorie, let's talk about the subject line, because that's really important. I'm a proponent, and I'd love to get your opinions on this, Jason, Marjorie, Casey. I like to use the person's name in the subject line.
Mm-hmm.
So I say, hi, Marjorie, story idea for you. Hi, Casey, saw this, thought of you. And the reason I like to put the person's name in the subject line is because I feel like for my own behavior, I get 101 different emails that I don't know the person, right? If I see it, then if I don't see my name, then it's a battle of, is this pitch in one sentence sexy enough for me to open it? But if I see my name, right, I'm more likely to open it. Would you guys agree with that? What do you think are best practices with the subject line there?
I'd like to go back and forth between like their name, or like I'll do news sometimes, just so that they know that this is a news story. It's not coming from a store that they may have subscribed to. Like I want them to know it's an actual something that they can pitch.
And do you put news in capital letters or bold print, or just put it news?
So sometimes I'll do in caps, but I'll do news and then colon and something else to kind of catch their eye in that subject line.
Okay. Casey, what do you do?
I think honestly, it goes a little back and forth. Like I said, with every contact, I kind of switch it up depending on what the vibe is with that person. I've tried the empty subject line before. I know a lot of people kind of stand by that. I'm honestly not a fan, just because I think of myself in that position and I'm not going to open an empty subject email. I think that seems spammy. A lot of times what I'll do is try to think of, like, if I were the journalist, what would I call this story? What would the title be? And so I'll bold print that and put that in the subject line.
And Jason, what are your thoughts? Old wise sage. Jason.
I'm all over the place. I'm with Casey. I will use the no subject line when they're not getting back to me. I will use the no subject line if I really want them to read it, because my research show, or what I've seen from other research, is people are more likely to click on something without a subject because they're bothered by it. They're like, why is there not a subject here? So then they want to know what it's about. And I've had somebody ream me before, like, I can't believe you sent me this without a subject line. That's so unprofessional. But yet they read it, you know what I mean? So, it's kind of one of those things. Yeah. So, I'm a big believer in, you make big choices, right? You take risks, you make big choices. And so, as we were talking about earlier today, I believe in experimenting with every pitch. Every pitch is a little bit of an experiment, and you might get rewarded for taking a risk. You might get penalized for taking a risk. One place I would encourage our audience to go is just go on Twitter, where journalists will share very bad pitches, and you'll learn what not to do. And, as far as I know, our agency has never been called out for a bad pitch. And so the answer to that, what's that?
You better knock on some wood. Just kidding.
Yeah. Well, two things there. One is, I take it as a compliment, meaning that, we do a good job and we're not wasting time, and we're not trying to, pitch things that are not newsworthy. But at the same time, part of me thinks, gosh, if we've never been called out before, maybe we're not trying hard enough. Like, maybe we're not pitching enough. Maybe we're not, being aggressive enough. But at the same time, I think that, it's all about what your own boundaries are that you set, and your own standards. For me, I would prefer to have a great reputation. So, I liked, someone said earlier, and I really like this, like, you don't want to give away your entire story in the initial pitch. All it is a teaser, right? And, I've had journalists respond to pitches I've sent them, and they're like, Jason, this sounds great, but please don't withhold the name of the person that you're offering, right? Or the name of the company that this is for. And, I see their side of that, but the truth is, I got exactly what I wanted, which was them to say, yes, I'm interested in this. Tell me who's the source. Instead of them judging a book by the cover as to what the source might be, we had an opportunity for us to tell them, to bring them the topic, bring them the angle without the proper nouns of who it is and what company it is. I just want them to objectively be interested in the story. Then we can introduce more facts and more details later. And I think that's the problem, is that a lot of PR people will send a 6-paragraph summary or 6-paragraph pitch. And it's like, the person, you just don't get a little bit of back and forth where they can ask you some questions. So for example, just yesterday I was pitching something and I just said, hey, I saw your query or your request for a source on this topic. And I just said, I actually disagree with what you're asking. I have a contrarian view of this. And then I just said, would you like to hear more about that? It was short, it was sweet, but I was provocative in saying, I know you're asking for A, but I think B. Are you still interested in talking to me about this? And she was. And what I got was a quick yes. And in sales, they talk about a series of yeses, right? So we want them to say, yes, I want to know more. Yes, I got your email. Yes, I'm interested in having a conversation. So she told me, hey, I like what you sent. I will send you a link soon when the story goes live. And so by standing out from everyone else who just got in line to say, yes, here's my expert advice on the topic you shared, I said, I have a contrarian and different view than what you're asking. And that, I think, helped me stand out a little bit more and build a relationship with her. And of course, once the article goes live and she tells me about it, I'm going to say, hey, this was great. What else can we help you with? I have other clients, I have other sources, and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's move on to the pitching. I think we've talked a little bit about pitching. We've got several things here. I know we don't have a ton more time. So I'm going to let Marjorie go first with one tip, then we'll go to Casey, and then we'll go to Bob.
So I would say individualize each pitch that you're sending. Number one, don't mass send to multiple outlets in one email blast. Make sure you are using their names. Hey, I saw you recently at such and such, or, oh, I saw that you were recently in Boston. Like, how was it? Like, I have this story, it all goes back to your relationship building. So if it may seem like faster or easier, just copy the pitch. But, and sometimes like we're on a Google platform, and I have found that sometimes, if you've sent the same thing to multiple people, it like grays out, your response, like, so you don't know how it's going to appear on someone else's screen. So to be able to individualize those pitches and that connection with that reporter, make sure that you're not making a mistake or making them not feel like you want them in this story.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think too, to build off of that, aside from your journalist feeling like you're just pitching like a story that everyone else is getting the same email for, I think looking at your media list and looking at the outlets that your contacts work at, like I had a situation last week where I was pitching 2 different media outlets. One was more B2B, so business executives were the audience of one. And then the second was just a regular news media outlet. So every average Joe like drinks his coffee in the morning and is watching this station. And I realized that the pitch would be completely different for those 2 outlets, even though I'm pitching the same story, because we're not telling the story for the same audience. Mm-hmm. And so I think even if you take that same like one punchline of what you're trying to pitch and then individualize it a little bit based on the message that they're going to put across, I think that kind of shows that you put in a little bit more effort.
Agreed. I don't think cut and paste is going to win you a lot of mentions as much as just, like you said, making it individual to each person you're pitching to. My 2 thoughts on, I have 2 thoughts that are kind of related about pitching. One, as a former media person, former local TV news reporter, we like things on silver platters. So the more you can set up in advance for the journalist, the easier it is for them to say yes. So work with your clients, tell them, hey, we need your people lined up and ready to go. We need their contact information in the pitch, if you can. The other thing is TV news people, especially because that's my background, do not like talking heads generally. We like people that are affected by the news that we're reporting. So rather than getting all tied up on your expert or the CEO that you have to pitch as a spokesperson, that's important, but realize it may be more appealing to a journalist to have the actual customer that is being worked with, that client, rather than the CEO, and trying to work with your client to make their customers available in the pitch as well.
Bob, why don't you talk a little bit more about what you shared with me a week or two ago about the start small, go big, and end small formula?
One of the things that you'll see time and time again in especially TV news stories is the idea they will start a story with an individual. So let's say the housing market, for example, in 2008, when it tanked, this was used over and over again. Instead of talking the big numbers right off the bat, all that stuff, most news reporting started with an individual family or a person who lost their home, right? And they told their story for a few paragraphs or a few lines, and then they used that story to get to the bigger data, which is here's what's going on nationally with this, and let's explore some of this national picture. And then they came back to that person at the end of the story to wrap it up and say, this is what's happening to this person now. So it's that start small, get big, go small again, which you can use to your advantage in pitching too.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And as a consumer of news, once you explain that, now I mean, not only do I see it now, but I've seen it all the time over and over again.
Yeah,
right?
you'll see it time and time again. I've ruined news for you guys.
It's
like
right.
it's like when you know what storytelling is with movie writing, and once you get the formula down, then you see it over and over again in your movies. It's the same way with TV news.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Best stories are in that like right before the first commercial break, and then like because I mean I interned at a couple of TV stations as well, so I've got everything that you say, Bob. Like I'm like I know, like I agree. But I mean it's amazing to work on this side of things, but to have also worked like at a station and to see, what goes in, and so many consumers don't know what really goes into creating a news story or a television interview. Like for some, they may start their day and they do one interview here and then drive 45 minutes away to get another interview for that same story, or it's just, I mean, it's really amazing. But yeah, the more that you can provide to a reporter, okay, here's the person, here's some statistics, here's because they've got several stories they may have to do in one day, and so the more that you can give them in your in your pitch or in your outreach with them, the better that you can help them.
Especially in outlets with daily deadlines, it isn't always the most newsworthy story that hits air. It's the story that you could do that day.
Yep.
And ones that have that human interest. It's what's going to pull on those heartstrings, or what has a connection to people, because that is going to make an impact.
Yeah, that's good. I would just say, if there's anybody in our audience, listening to this or watching this who is striking out with pitching media, we're giving them a lot of great, content. We're giving them grapes of information and value that they can use. But I would say, if you're not consuming news and looking for the structure of a news story and the trends and topics that news outlets are covering, you're not dissecting the news that you're seeing, the target outlet you're pursuing, and you're not spending time consuming it yourself, that's probably why you're unsuccessful. And I would do a deeper dive, and I would start slow and go low into the details and go slowly into building that relationship, go slowly into pitching. Because if it's really valuable to you that you get your client in this magazine, on this website, on this, television show, if it's as valuable as we say it is, which we know it is, then why would you not spend the time doing that deep dive and perfecting the pitch so that it stands out, instead of doing a a mass email to 100 outlets. You really spend time getting to know that person, following what they cover, emulate their own language and their own voice, mirror their tone back to them in what you're writing. It'll be amazing how much different and genuine and authentic that'll feel to them, and it'll feel for you. And I think you'll see your win rate increase. So, it's like a baseball player who waits for the perfect pitch before they swing. We need to be selective about who we're pitching and how we're pitching them, and really just try to get on, maybe not always get a home run, just get some at bats and get on base kind of thing, to use the baseball analogy of, smaller wins will lead to bigger things. And one example I tell is how one time we had a client in the Orlando Sentinel. A few days later, the Tampa Bay Times picked it up. The next day, the LA Times picked it up, and the next day, NBC National picked it up. And so it started arguably small, just with one newspaper, but then it went all over and it went viral in the way news is known to go viral. But it took that planning and plotting to get that first win under your belt.
And Jason, I love that story you tell about Abraham Lincoln, that quote. Can you share that?
Well, I've heard recently it's not an accurate quote, but I will share it, which is
okay.
Abe
It's
Lincoln
a great story either way.
allegedly said, if I have 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'm going to spend the first 4 sharpening my axe. So in other words, I think the way we could look at it is, if I really want a client to be in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, CNBC, but I'm going to spend a lot of time consuming that outlet and the sections and the writers and the topics and tones they're covering. Find the best person to pitch them in a way that you think matches the style that they report or the tonality they take in their topics. And you really just double down on that one, journalist or that one outlet. And then meanwhile, you do the same deep dive on the other 2 or 3. And I think you'll find a lot more fruit that way.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's jump into our last topic here, the following up. When I think of following up, I think of Marjorie and all the follow-ups we've shared over the years with her follow-up efforts. So Marjorie, if you have a follow-up tip you want to do, I'll go to you first, Casey next, and then Bob.
Well, just do it. I mean, I wouldn't be working for Axia if I hadn't followed up. I hadn't heard back from Jason, and was like, all right, well, I'm going to follow up and see if I can at least just do an informational interview with him. And he liked that I followed up. And I mean, it has worked out very well for me, not only here at Axia, but, in all of my media pitching and in other forms of my life. Squeaky wheel gets the oil, or
It's the grease.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
But I mean, seriously, and you don't have to be annoying about it. Follow up on a different day, follow up, hey, just wanted to see if you needed any more information from me. Can I answer any other questions for you? But you would be amazed at how many stories that we have secured just because we've followed up. Mm-hmm. Without follow-up, I mean, you may have pitched a reporter and they were out of town, and they didn't have their out of office. So you would have, then they get back and they've got 50 emails that they're trying to go through, and they may have just missed the email. I mean, they're just following up. I mean, I just don't know how it is that and relationship building are like my 2 favorite things. And I think Jason, a couple weeks ago, we were working on a story and he's like, did you follow up? And I was like, come on, Linda, let's go. Follow up.
Linda,
I wrote the book on following up. Yeah.
Just do it. I mean, seriously, I don't know. I love being a resource for reporters, and knowing, being able to share media coverage with clients and saying yeah, we reached out to them and then we followed up, and here's the awesome story that we were able to secure that included your company or your, it's really awesome.
Nice. Casey, you're on mute, but please share a tip.
Sorry, I got a little noisy there for a second. Yes, I would agree with that. Honestly, I was speaking with Jason about adopting a new policy for myself where I don't stop following up until either my contact tells me they're interested or the story isn't relevant anymore. I've gotten so many thank yous for sending follow-up messages, and they're like, thank you, it's at the top of my inbox now, which makes me feel a little bit better, because I think as a PR person, you do start to feel like, wow, like I am being super annoying. I'm constantly sending this person emails.
Yep.
But at the same time, you have to think their inbox is full of so many of those emails that you just need to break through the clutter. And I think following up is how you do that. So long as it's an evergreen idea. If it's timely, though, sometimes you have to let it die out, I think.
Yeah, and I love your framing it different, Casey. I think that's very helpful. Instead of going into those follow-ups as if I'm pestering you, I'm going into it as I am providing service here for you. Is there anything I can do to help you? And I think that's a really important thing with follow-ups, is that you have to realize that journalists constantly needs good stories. There's an endless amount of content they need to produce. And so if you go into it thinking I'm doing them a service as opposed to I'm here to pester them, it'll change the way you have communications, I think. Right. The analogy I use, we've talked about different analogies, you know, the worm on the hook and all that stuff, is I view it as you're a waiter at a very fine restaurant. And think of your own behavior. See, you know, sometimes you don't want to eat the seafood. Sometimes you don't want to eat dessert. And that's fine. It's no reflection of you as a waiter. Your job is to provide options, as good a service as possible. If they have a good experience, they will come back over and over again. And there's a peer of ours in PR, Michael Smart, who's followed by a lot of people, who has a phrase for this, and he calls it diplomatic tenacity. And I think that fits very aptly with following up. You're diplomatic at all times, but you're tenacious as well.
Right. I've found recently that follow-ups can also be super beneficial just for us to better understand what the journalist is looking for. So I had an experience a couple weeks ago where I pitched a story and I followed up a good handful of times. There was a long email chain going on. And eventually I got a response saying something along the lines of, I'm going to have to pass on this because I just covered something super similar to it, but you're right around where I need you to be. Like, these are the ideas that I'm looking for, which is such good feedback, excuse me, because then I know, like, I'm in the neighborhood. This isn't the story, but I can keep sending them stuff and they'll use it eventually.
It's like they're saying warmer. Yeah.
I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Well, like I recently had pitched a story to a reporter. You know, the company is pretty well known in the town where this reporter was at, and so I sent him an email, and then hadn't heard back. You know, and I mean, while they have their cell phones and their emails now in their pocket, like, you don't know what they're doing. They're working on a story. It was some really exciting news for this company that I knew that they would want to cover. So this one reporter that I have a really good relationship with, I, you know, waited a few hours and then texted them, said, hey, sent you some exciting news to your inbox. And I mean, the response that I got was they'd gone to their inbox, read it, and wrote me back, awesome, in all caps and like 3 exclamation points. You know, sometimes, you know, but also it's knowing your audience and knowing who those reporters are. You know, I'm not just going to do that to, you know, the executive producer at NBC, you know, I mean, because or who is
timing, and the timing is so key. If you really want to find a really bad phone exchange, call a national network assignment desk right around news time. You'll get the most rude reception on a phone as you can possibly get. It's intimidating, it's awful. But then if you call during a time when it's slow, or when they're, you know, they're in a lull, it's a slow news day, you're going to get a far different reception. So timing is key too.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. I had a journalist recently not call me back when I left him a voicemail, and instead he emailed me and just said, what do you got? We're so busy today, you know? But I knew the guy, so I know he wasn't being rude, and he felt comfortable with me, you know, being very direct like that. So I think we're running out of time. Does anybody have any closing things they wanted to mention? I've got 3 here that I can do, but I wanted to give you guys a chance as well.
I just had one.
Okay, go ahead.
Back to some of the relationships, looking back at maybe where you went to college, you're in university, and connecting with those reporters, because it just is another thing that you can use to build a relationship with. So, Jason went to the best journalist school in the country.
Can we cut that out of this recording? I'm a KU guy. I can't stand by.
Sorry, Bob. The facts are in my favor on this.
Hey, being from Kansas City, I can relate to both of y'all.
Okay,
so,
Mizzou is a very good journalism school. I'll give you that.
I'm sorry, Bob. You said something.
Being able to connect with those, or seeing, for me, when I used our media databases, I didn't go to Mizzou, I didn't go to KU, but I know people that did, and being from Kansas City, I can relate to those people. First time I ever met you, Bob, I was like, oh, you went to KU and you're from Nebraska. It just goes back to those relationship building opportunities. And so don't think that something that you think is silly, that you may have a connection with somebody. Like I said, the gardening, it may actually be very fruitful for you.
Yep. Mm-hmm. All right. Anyone else?
I think I'm good. Go for it, Jason.
So the things I wanted to close with were, speaking of follow-ups, it's amazing to me when we do follow up, how many times journalists will thank us. Thank you for following up with me. I'm so glad you stayed on me about this. When you first reached out, I wanted to do the story, but I was on special assignment, or I was out of town, or I was about to go out of town. And then they end up doing the story. And many times it's after I think, man, this is so stale to them at this point. But, again, going back to sales and being like media pitching, a sales guy I used to work with told me that sometimes when you follow up with somebody and they just don't get back to you, sometimes you need what he said, a change of voice. So either you're changing the way you're following up with them. If you've been emailing them, now you text them. If you've been texting them, now you DM them, or you just pick up the phone the old fashioned way and call them. Or he might say, maybe you need to tandem pitch them. So in other words, if Casey's, if Marjorie's been pitching somebody, maybe she might say, hey, Casey, would you touch base with this reporter about a story? And so Casey might say, hey, my colleague Marjorie was reaching out to you about this. She didn't hear back, but I wanted to see if, I wanted to try you one more time to see if you were interested, or something like that. Even a week ago, I know Marjorie was pitching something for us, maybe 2 weeks now. And I was in the car on a drive, and I decided I'm just going to call that reporter, that editor. And I actually called the editor, and my voicemail went something like this. Hey, I know my colleague Marjorie sent you something a week or two ago. As far as I know, you haven't expressed interest in it. I was a little surprised and candidly kind of maybe even disappointed. So I thought I'd just call you and make sure you saw it and see if you had any questions for me. I'm going to be in the car for the next 2 hours. If you want to call me, I can talk to you hands-free about it. And he didn't get back to me. But the next day I sent an email, said, hey, I left you a voicemail. I repeated my voicemail. Per my voicemail yesterday, my colleague Marjorie was in touch with you. We didn't hear back from you. Just wanted to make sure you saw it, because I would think you would be interested in this. And he replied back and said, Jason, I've been so interested in this that I've wanted to set aside time for me to personally interview the person about this story. And it's just, we're short staffed right now or whatever. And he said, but if you can tell me some good times, I'll schedule an interview. And boom, we had an interview scheduled, by the end of the week or whatever. So that's happening later, or next week, I guess. So point is that we think we're being a pest by following up, but journalists really appreciate, especially when we know we have something newsworthy and we know it's so newsworthy, we're willing to take a risk like I did and call them and say, I'm kind of surprised you didn't get back to me about this. So I thought I would do another attempt to reach out to you. And the other thing I've learned in sales is this expression of a quick no is better than a forever maybe. And I've also heard, not in sales, but actually in pitching, well, it's sales, pitching a book to a publishing house, that the first 50 rejections are the hardest. So I think about those two cliches, right? No, a quick no is better than a forever maybe. So I'd rather a journalist say, no, this is not for me. I've even had journalists email me when I follow up to say, Jason, I will never cover this story. Well, now I have clarity, right? Yeah. I know you don't want it. I'm not going to waste my time with you anymore. There used to be a reporter here in town for the daily newspaper who was pretty arrogant. And so arrogant, you'd start pitching him by phone and he would literally start yawning like, you know, whatever. And people would bellyache about that and complain about him and how hard it was to work with. I'm like, I love that guy, because the minute he starts yawning on me while I'm pitching him a story, which he did, I would then improvise and pivot and shift to another angle to try to get him to say yes. And he respected that for me. And he would often end up doing my stories either because I pushed back and I was like, don't yawn at me yet, you know, or don't shush me yet. Like, there's a story here and I'm going to make sure you hear it. Or I would quickly pivot and come up with a new angle for the same story. And that gained his respect. So a quick no is better than a forever maybe. Changing up your voice, I think, is important. The other thing is, you know, there's also a cliche of never accept a no from someone who's not empowered to say yes. So in other words, if you're getting no from a reporter, then, you know, and you really believe in it, then you go to their editor, or you go to the assignment editor, you go to the news director, you go to the show producer, and, you know, they're getting pitched so many stories, they're probably not going to say, you know, oh, Jason called me about that one too, until they agree to do the story. And then they have a conversation of why the first person said no. But usually the first person is trained to say no. It's kind of like when you send your resume to HR, you know, their job is to take 100 applicants and say no to 80% or 90% of them, right? So if you really want to stand out, that's one way to do it. So anybody else got anything before we wrap this up?
No, I'm glad we've got it all figured out, though. You know, we've got it all figured out. But
This
yeah,
was fun.
Yeah, I've learned a lot from the conversation. So no, thanks.
Yeah. I think it was a good one.
A good point to make at the end as well. It doesn't matter how long you've been in the industry, you're still learning every single day. So I learn from you guys every day, and I feel like we can kind of share tips depending on how things change over time. So
yep, that's another core value of get better, 1% better every day, right? And we learn by doing and helping each other along the way. And I have connections, Casey's got connections, you know, we all have other connections and contacts, so we should be collaborating as well. So yeah, this was great. I'm really glad we did it. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for those that tuned in, and hopefully you learned something. And by the way, if you did learn something, please do us a favor and either, you know, through social media, tag us and tell us what you learned, or share this recording or this on-demand video with others in your network who you think would benefit from it.
Amen.
All right, excellent. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
thank you.
Bye-bye.